erosion control. When you're doing any rehabilitation work, clearing or planting or anything like that, make sure that you keep in mind and plan for erosion control. See if you can try and mitigate any erosion problems that might arise. Preserve existing vegetation. This is a big one. If you can leave the trees there, if you can leave the vegetation there, do it. Especially in riparian areas or areas on steep slopes. All these other areas that we talked about. If you can preserve the vegetation. Now, obviously, if it's hazardous, you got to do what's best in that regard. Take it out if you need to. But if it's possible, preserve the vegetation. Even the ground vegetation that's been burnt still has an intact root system that can help hold that soil in place for a while. Minimize soil disturbance. Again, if you're pushing a road, if you're clearing a road, if you're clearing anything, if you're disturbing any amount of soil, try and minimize that soil footprint, or that disturbance footprint. If you're grazing, you might have to defer grazing for a while until that vegetation can reestablish. Move the livestock off of those impacted areas. And if you're doing any sort of salvage logging or logging for debris removal, make sure that you follow Texas Forestry best management practices. And those are available on the Texas Forestry website. So some additional information about this is available again on the Bastrop County Disaster website. We have two publications. They're both titled the exact same. Wildfire Recovery, Protecting Your Property from Soil Erosion. Okay, one's just a short pamphlet. Another one's a little bit bigger technical guide with a little bit more information in it. So now I want to move into some erosion control practices. And these are kind of guidelines that we established through the working group as being manageable practices for controlling erosion within the Bastrop fire. First thing I want to talk about is where and when you're going to need to implement these practices. And that's going to be a site-specific basis. It's really going to depend on the conditions on your particular area, okay? But, and that's going to be dictated by all the things that we talked about in the maps previously. The topography, the vegetation conditions as a result of the burn, how severely was the area burned, and the potential for soil erosion. If you go out and it might be in a heavily burned area, but there really isn't any risk for soil erosion, then there's no need to be controlling for soil erosion. Consequences of erosion are going to dictate which practices. If we're talking about preventing some erosion in like a pasture area compared to a severe erosion event that could impact property, that might dictate how much money, how much resources you want to invest into that erosion control measure. The weather obviously is a questionable factor, we're not sure. Cost of available resources, that's all going to be dictated by site-specific conditions, how much area you're dealing with, how big of a risk is the erosion problem, what practice are you implementing, and then obviously the land use, whatever you're trying to manage that property for, is also going to be a factor. So in an attempt to try and get at some of these things and provide a little bit more information, we developed this practice guide. This is also available on the county website, and what we attempted to do is review the 8 practices that we came up with and come up with some guidance on where and when those practices work best. So if you want some more information about the practices that I'm about to talk about, this is the place to get it. So let's go through some of these really quickly here. How are we doing on time? We got plenty of time?
It's 3:25, I'm not sure. I just walked in, so I don't know what you're...
When's this over?
25 minutes.
25 minutes, okay.
Thank you.
All right, so hydromulching is the first one. The purpose of hydromulching is to establish an immediate and short-term cover for the soil. The first few practices I'm going to talk about are cover practices, and then we'll talk about some slope control practices after that. So we want to, this is an attempt to establish a cover in places where the cover was removed, obviously by the burn. So you don't have that vegetation protection anymore. This is going to help mitigate that rainfall impact and provide a little bit of surface roughness to mitigate runoff. It's typically applied in a slurry, mixed with water, some sort of wood mulch or paper pulp, and then sometimes they use a tackifier, which kind of increases the stickiness of the slurry and helps it hold in place. We would generally probably recommend these for small to medium sized areas, and what exactly that range is I can't say, but if you start getting into wide areas, the cost is just going to explode. Depending on the contractor or whatever deal you might be able to work out. Another thing is it's not exactly great for the long slopes. We talked about those grades, even if you have a gentle grade. If it's a long grade, what can happen is the water can start channelizing within that hydro mulch, and it can start rilling and then start forming gullies. And once you go down that route, then you're just back into the erosion issues again. The costs of all of these are going to be site-specific, project-specific. It's going to depend on what you're trying to do it for, or what you're trying to do, how big of an area you're trying to treat, and so on.
Question?
Yes?
Is that supposed to be 800 to 2,000 pounds per acre?
Yes, it is. I'm not sure what happened there. I think the picture might be cutting it off, but yeah. And that can vary depending on what the contractor will decide for your specific site, but that's just a general ballpark range. Okay, so the next one is erosion control mats. These are just mats made out of either some sort of organic material or some sort of synthetic material. Synthetic materials typically are meant to last longer. The organics are typically biodegradable. And again, this is just trying to form or establish a quick cover for the exposed ground. This works best for small areas because this erosion control matting can get kind of expensive when you start doing larger areas. Some important aspects of using erosion control mats is it has to make good contact with the ground. So if you have a lot of rocks, if you have a lot of debris across the ground, you're going to have to remove that because it's not going to work unless it's in contact with the ground. In order to do that, you have to have kind of a homogeneous landscape, and you also have to anchor it with either stakes or I think they come with wire pins. And there's some guidance within that document on the website that tell you how often you need to stake it, how often, where, and what that spacing should be. Another aspect, you need to trench this at the top of the slope in a 4 to 6 inch trench to hold it in place. And then you need to make sure that these erosion control mats are overlapped. 4 to 6 inches going across the slope and up to 3 feet going down the slope, shingle style. Okay, so one underneath the other. Okay, and that's really important. You want to make sure that you're considering that when you go out and buy this erosion control matting. You're accounting for that overlap. Okay. And then the last thing is you want to inspect these erosion control mats frequently and repair any problems before they become too big. So slash is another cover method that you can use. It's going to depend on whether you have the material on site or nearby. This might not work real good for really heavily eroded areas. You might not have the material available. It needs to be really fine material, so it'd be difficult to go out and just grab a treetop, slash it up with a chainsaw, because you really need to make this material fine enough that it covers, it makes good contact with the soil and covers the soil. So this would be more like chipped material, ground material, things like that. If you're going to be spreading this with the heavy machinery, you want to make sure that you're being cognizant of sensitive areas. Areas on steep slopes, erosive soils, areas adjacent to water bodies, ponds, lake streams, things like that. Even if they're dry, you want to make sure that you're not creating a lot of disturbance next to those channels, because once it rains, you have that disturbed soil right adjacent to the water body. Okay, so straw mulch is another option, and this might not be very financially feasible right now with where the cost of the product is. You can either apply it by hand or with a blower, and again, this is just another method to try and establish cover on the site. The recommendations range from 1 to 2 tons per acre, and you're trying to establish generally 70% ground cover. You want to spread that straw mulch to a depth of 2 to 3 inches. And you want to make sure that if you're using, that you are using a weed-free straw, so that you're not spreading invasives or anything like that. In areas where they're subject to high winds or exposed, you might need to anchor those, like plug it into the ground or cover it with like a netting product they have available with this.
I have a question.
Yes.
And you may not know the answer, but somebody here might know. I know that Blue Bonnet Electric has got their contractors out there chipping up all the trees and limbs and everything. Well, what are they doing with all those chips? Anybody
They'll
know?
sell them eventually. There's a company in Cedar Park, I believe, that is doing that, and they'll be selling.
Cheap? I wonder if they could just leave it there, chip it and leave it there.
I think they sell it to compensate them for cutting the trees down.
I'm not exactly sure what the availability of that material is. Roxanne, do you know?
We're exploring the feasibility of making some of the debris that you see on Highway 71 and Highway 21, making some of that vegetative debris available to landowners within the burn area for doing a light ground cover. We're not there yet. We are exploring the feasibility. Keep an eye on the county's website, which Chuck has had up on the screen several times for more information.
Thank you.
Does that mean if they do chop up trees on your easement, they're not going to leave
Two would be a whole block.
the stuff there? Slash.
I know Blue Bonnet has not been, and neither has Textile.
Any other questions on that? Okay. So seeding is the last cover treatment that we'll talk about, and this one is probably going to be the most economical one, but it's also going to be one that you can really have some negative impacts on the environment if you don't do it properly. And so what I'd really recommend is anybody considering going down this route, go on the county website and look up a document called, I think it's called Reseeding the Lost Pines or something like that. But these are the reseeding guidelines that the recovery team has developed. And it has recommendations for seed mix and also the application rate, okay? But obviously seeding is an excellent way to establish a cover. It's not going to be as fast as the other methods because it's going to take time, obviously, for that seed to germinate and grow. So you're going to have a lag time, and you need to plan for that, where that soil is still going to remain exposed and subject to erosion. Was there a question back here?
You said seed mix, does that mean a mixture of species?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that, like I said, is available in this document. They have both a temporary and a long-term seed mix that can be applied. But definitely take a look at that if you want to go down this route. And, you know, seeding is often used in conjunction with, and because of this lag time, it's often used in conjunction with the other practices we've been talking about, erosion control mats, slash spreading.
The straw would be good
straw.
for the seeding.
Exactly. So if you're going to use it in conjunction, definitely take a look at this, the seed mix and the application rates as well. Okay. And you want to make sure that during this process, like everything else, that you're minimizing the amount of soil that you're disturbing. Okay. So the next couple that we're going to talk about are related to controlling the slope length. Okay, and we talked about the fact that as water travels down a slope, it can pick up velocity, which allows it to pick up more sediment. So what these practices attempt to do is break up that slope length, limit it, limit the amount of length that the water can travel before being deflected. And so that's what this contour felling does. And if you were next door listening to the park, they've implemented this practice. They also have some pictures out on their booth out front. So basically all this is you fell trees along the contour of the slope, and it's really important that you fell them and place them on the contour. I'll talk about that in a second. And you put it in an alternating pattern so that the water has to kind of meander its way down the slope, okay? You want to anchor the logs on the bottom side. You can either use a stump or rocks or a stake like this. And then most practices generally recommend that you build a small trench in front of that log. You will also want to make sure that you're using straight logs and that log is in complete contact with the ground the whole way across. So what you can do is take this dirt that you've excavated out from this trench and fill any cracks underneath the log. So what will happen is the water will come down. Once it drops its velocity, then it'll drop all the sediments and that'll all gather here. And the reason I said that it's important that you keep those logs on the contour or across the contour is if you angle that log up or down slope from 2 to 5%, studies have shown that you'll lose 20% of the capacity, the efficiency of that log to trap sediments. So obviously, yes?
So we check that with a level?
You can eyeball it, but you just need to make sure that it's not off by too much.
My eye doesn't work real good on a hill, but I'm saying a little, you can have a pocket level and put it on there and
You could do
Yes.
you could do that.
It shows the water going between two logs down to the next one, and it has it running down one way, and if it's straight across, would it fill up and come down on both logs? Or do you have an angle
I
to
think
make
it
it
would.
just go one way? rather
No,
than-
no. You don't want to try and direct the water. You just want to keep it perpendicular. The water will run out across